All right, welcome to video 2. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the FRQ. Um, I am going to stay pretty quiet during this so that I can concentrate, and you can speed up or slow down however it best helps you. Um, Afterwards, and when I'm done, I'll probably make a couple of comments about what I did and how successful I think I was. But this should give you a sense of how I'm going through the process. You're going to notice that I will be continually writing and not wasting a bunch of time thinking about what it is that I want to write because I know time is not on my side. So I know that I have to be as strategic as possible. So I'm not going to sit there and try to find the perfect hook. I'm just going to go, and then I can edit as I progress through. Okay. Um, so I'm going to stay pretty quiet here. I'm going to try to be as quiet as possible, and then you guys should be able to see what I've ended up producing from the outline that I made. Okay. Okay, I'm done. All right, let's go back and read it, and we'll see how I did. Okay. I have an introduction, one, two, three body paragraphs, and a conclusion, just like I'd planned. So let's take a look. Let me zoom in here. Let's think I can get rid of this. Try to keep it in the box so you can see it. Okay. Let's make it a little bigger. Okay. Now you may see some small errors as we go through because I was typing it as quickly as I could, but it took me about 30 minutes to do because I'm at 36, 38 right now. And I took a couple of minutes to talk to you guys. So, some moral matters are worth taking a stand on, and generations will always seek out ways to better understand our moral decisions and their unintended consequences. In a letter written by Samuel Johnson to the British government of his time, Johnson criticizes the government's need for debtors' prisons and emphatically highlights his desire for debtors' prisons to close, drawing out an emotional and logical argument as to why they are damaging both in his time and for generations to come. All right, as my introduction, I like it. The only thing I would say is that I have this opening hook here, and then I go straight into the letter of Samuel Johnson, but I don't connect the two. So I could say something to the effect of, in a letter written by Samuel Johnson to the British government of his time, Johnson criticizes such moral issues in a way that uh, stands the test of time. So I'm connecting the moral decisions to Johnson. And then I could say, Johnson argues that the need for debtors' prison. In his argument, Johnson complains about the needs for debtors' prisons and emphatically highlights his desire for debtors' prisons to close. So I could have just made a small tweak to connect my hook here, my first sentence, to transition into my comments about Samuel Johnson. As the letter begins, Johnson seeks to separate his argument from ones that have not swayed the government before. And instead of relying on emotion, Johnson will prove how illogical the debtors' prisons are. Johnson begins by highlighting our national tendency to look with indifference on things that would shake us with emotion, and emphasizes the inhumanity of debtors' prisons to the individual spirit. By relying on pathos and emotional diction, Johnson is able to present the emotional disservice that the country is participating in which a debtor is dragged to prison, pitied for a moment, and then forgotten. Another follows him and is lost alike the caverns of oblivion. In such description, Johnson's word choice is emotional as it is deeply manipulative, trying to force the intended audience, in this case the British government, that what choices they have made only extend the unnecessary misery that causes us to pity and lament, to wonder and abhor, making a case for the punishment of misery not applicable for the simple crime of debt. Use of rhetorical question here, as well as repetitive sentence structures, that bothers me, comma, force the reader to reflect on this misery and feel outrage at the actions taken to hurt the inhabitants of England. All right, I think this is pretty good. One thing that I do here that I think makes this even better is you notice I don't have blocks of quotes. I don't say in this quote. I integrate the quote into my analysis. So I have a blend here of analysis and evidence as opposed to sectioning it off, which makes this a lot easier to read. I start by saying as the letter begins, so you know I'm working chronologically. And you should notice that I have made a claim first. I said that Johnson seeks to separate his argument from ones that have not swayed the government before. And instead of relying on emotion, Johnson will prove how illogical the debtors' prisons are. So that's the claim I'm making about what he's doing here. And then I go into how he does that. Okay? Let's look at the next paragraph. See if I transition. Johnson then follows this discussion of abhorrence by highlighting the need for the country and its lawmakers to look at debtors' prisons from a larger vantage point and see how, while it seeks to erase debt, it hurts the entire population. Johnson's roughly, I meant Johnson, not Johnson's. Johnson roughly calculates how the country voluntarily sacrifices 1 in every 300 to lingering destruction, emphasizing not only the computational ridiculousness of this imprisonment, but also emotionally connecting it to triggering word choices. It is not sacrifice, but voluntary, and causes lingering destruction. Such language helps highlight Johnson's effort to establish a deeply indignant and critical tone that is supported by appeals that argue that the actions taken are in direct conflict with what the governments want, with what the government wants, I think is what I meant. And would have had enough time to go back and edit. So it becomes not just inhumane, but overall wasteful. He further highlights this wastefulness by using emotional parallelism to discuss the state of prisons and its crimes against human decency through its corrosion of resentment, the heaviness of sorrow, the corruption of confined air, the want of exercise, and sometimes of food, the contagion of disease from which there is no retreat. By placing the illogical nature of the decision and placing it next to the complicated horrors and emotional turmoil of the events of the society, it only amplifies the behavior of the government as destructively going against what is good for the whole society, thus failing at their duty to protect and to lead. Okay, I think this paragraph is pretty good. I might be a little wordy. I might need to cut down on a sentence, but overall, like, we can assume this is a rough draft. I think this is pretty strong. I do a lot of the same thing that I did before. I transition by mentioning what Johnson does next, highlighting that we're moving on. I have a clear topic sentence about what he does, in that that while debtors' prisons seek to erase debt, it ends up hurting the entire population. And then I go into how Johnson argues this. With my integrated quotes, I mention his tone and diction by using words like triggering word choices, which mean the same thing. And then I highlight it to actual evidence. So you can see me balancing again the analysis and the evidence that I've integrated into my argument. I also want to note that the second point I make is different from the first point. I'm not just continuing on the same points. I'm also adding new things. I do overuse certain words, and I noticed it as I was writing. Words like establish, highlight, and emphasize. But I would say, as long as I'm not constantly using the same word over and over again, like just using highlighting, then I'm okay. And then here's my last body paragraph. Johnson leaves the reader with not only disgust at the rule generally received, but how the decisions of a society that is eminent for society, studious of commerce, and ambitious for empire will lose more people. I should have put the society that is known as eminent for society, studious of commerce, and ambitious for empire will lose more people from this stupidity of its actions than famine, disease, and war. This striking claim by Johnson describes the need for social reform in both debtors' prisons and in how punishment is carried out in the gallows, and establishes the need for the country to live up to its legacy, rather than its current punishments. By presenting the society as an empire who would willingly lose in noisome dungeons 500,000 of its inhabitants, Johnson aptly uses his favorite technique of parallel structure to focus our attention on the loss of life over the crime, and uses not only exclamatory statements, such as perish in our gallows, but uses the subtle punctuation of the colon in line 69 to separate who England was as different from what they could become. By doing this, he put the actions of the government as the direct result of the damaged defense of the country, because had the country not spent, wasteful time detaining 20,000 in prison, it could have done more to protect the country from such horrors as pestilence and sword. In this way, Johnson can dramatize the problem in a way that rings true for every person in England, from the farmers to those highest in government, that this is a problem that impacts all of them, and they have the opportunity to change it. Okay, So overall, again, this body paragraph, if I'm done well in my first two body paragraphs, I'm probably, if I maintain the same kind of criteria, I can say that I've done good in my third body paragraph. I think my transition here is a little bit weak. I ended with thus failing at their duty to protect and to lead. And then I went into Johnson leaves the reader. I've signaled that we're moving on, but I could have connected these two statements a little bit better. But I would say that's relatively minor. And I've done a lot of the same stuff. I am identifying the claim here. Notice that I have put evidence into my opening sentences, but I am putting the evidence to make the point that I want to make in this section. So I said Johnson leaves the reader with disgust by how the decisions of a society will lose more people, will cause more loss of people because of the stupidity of its actions. Okay, so that's my claim, and then I support it. Okay, so notice a couple of things. I only mention rhetorical strategies after my first sentence. I do not start. I start with a point, something the writer is doing or attempting to do, and then I'm supporting it with evidence and analysis. Okay, now let's look at my conclusion. And this is going to be highly dependent on how much time you have at the end. I could have shortened this. It didn't have to be quite as flourishing. And if you have to sacrifice length for something, I would sacrifice the conclusion over the introduction. While Johnson himself had no specific authority into what happened in debtors' prisons, he, along with writers such as Charles Dickens, were able to use pen and paper to argue for the most vulnerable in the society, making it clear that the problems of the gallows were one of poverty and sacrifice, and that it would be necessary for those more fortunate to help and show compassion to those who cannot help but fall victim to the pull of destructive poverty and need. This lesson has fallen on deaf ears at times, but still impacts all of us, and reminds us that compassion has more than just emotional and moral positives for us, but that sometimes doing good for others is also one of societal and economic gain. Okay, so I bring in my conclusion what we today can learn from this, like a takeaway, and how the bigger message here is that it's not just about morality for morality's sake. It's morality ends up helping the larger picture. If you look at the larger picture, it's good for all of us. Okay, so if I was to score myself in this essay, and obviously, there's a certain bias I have because it's my own writing, but I would say that my thesis is very clear. You could highlight my thesis with a pen, and you would know exactly I'm answering the question. So I would give myself a point for thesis. In terms of evidence and commentary, has to do with like the balance of my evidence and my commentary. And so that's a score out of 4. I think I have a good balance of evidence and commentary. The way I kind of identify this is, let's look at the length of my body paragraphs. Are they consistent? So with this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is about 14 sentences. This one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This is 16 sentences. And then this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah, they're all around the same length, which gives you a sense that my analysis is balanced throughout. So I think I would give myself a 4 for this. You could give me a 3. There's got to be a little bit of leeway in terms of what it is the grader is looking at. But, I give myself a 4, so I'd give myself full points for that. And then I would also give myself a point for sophistication. And the reason I would give myself the point for sophistication would be the way I have integrated my evidence so that it doesn't stop the flow of the reading. So I would end up giving myself full credit for this FRQ, which, to be fair, I am an English teacher, so that's okay. But I could easily get, instead of getting a 6 out of 6, maybe I get a 5 out of 6. That's still a very, very good score. And I'm not expecting you to write 100% like me. It's really to give you a sense of, like, in the time this is best how we're going to kind of structure it. So what I did as I was writing, because you didn't hear me while I was writing, was I had my notes next to me, and where I primarily used them was when I was writing my topic sentence for my body paragraphs to make sure that I was staying on topic. And then I referred back to what were some of the strategies I was going to talk about. So I use it as a guide to write my paper. I don't rely on it for every sentence. The only thing that I relied on specifically was I had my thesis written down on my handwritten notes, and so I knew that I wanted to follow that. I wanted to follow that thesis in my introductory paragraph. Okay, I really hope this was helpful. Um, I would have had maybe 3 or 4 minutes to go back through and catch any errors. I did have, you saw, I did have some construction errors, some not spelling errors, but like using the wrong word. Um, as long as it's not overly distracting and it wasn't here, that's not something that an AP grader is going to worry about. Okay, so I'd give this about a 5 or a 6. If you disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I will end this video here because it's already pretty long, and hopefully you can get some use out of this. Talk to you guys later.